When Dave stepped onto the plane wearing his bright red MAGA hat, he expected a few stares, but not open hostility. The flight attendant didn't just confront him. She humiliated him in front of the entire cabin, accusing him of offending everyone on board. What she didn't realize was that the man she targeted wasn't just another passenger. By the time they landed, her world and her career would be turned upside down. Let's rewind to where it all began. Dave, a 39-year-old man with a strong jawline, short-cropped brown hair peppered with gray, and piercing blue eyes, steps onto the plane with a quiet confidence. His crisp navy blazer, neatly pressed khakis, and polished brown loafers suggest a man of precision and discipline, someone who knows who he is and doesn't apologize for it. But it's the bold red MAGA hat perched on his head that draws all the attention, a symbol that has turned him into a lightning rod before he's even reached his seat. As he strides down the aisle with a black leather bag slung casually over one shoulder, the tension is palpable. Passengers shoot him quick glances, their eyes darting between the hat and his face, some filled with curiosity, others with disapproval. Dave, unbothered, moves with the steady gait of a man who's weathered worse. He senses the whispers, the shifting of bodies in seats as people either judge or shrink away. It's not his first time being a target for wearing his beliefs on his sleeve, or rather, his head. But today, the air feels heavier, the glances more cutting, as if silently daring him to defend himself. Halfway to his seat, Maria, a flight attendant in her early 30s, plants herself squarely in his path. Petite but formidable, she exudes an air of rigid authority. Her dark brown hair is pulled back into a severe bun, and her polished uniform seems almost too perfect, as if tailored for intimidation. Her arms cross over her chest, and her sharp eyes lock onto his hat like a predator, eyeing prey. "Excuse me, sir," she says, her voice clipped and cold. Her accent, thick and unmistakably foreign, adds an edge to her words. Her lips curl slightly, a frown that makes her disdain clear before she even finishes her sentence. "You'll need to remove that hat. It's against our airline's policy to wear offensive symbols on board." Dave halts, his expression calm, his head tilting slightly as he studies her. One brow arches faintly in a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Offensive?" His voice is steady, deliberate. "It's just a hat." Maria's frown deepens, her tone sharp enough to cut through the hum of the cabin. "It offends other passengers," she snaps, making no attempt to lower her voice. Nearby passengers begin to shift in their seats, some pretending not to listen, others leaning in just enough to catch the conversation. Dave doesn't flinch. His gaze remains steady, unyielding. That's their problem, not mine. The surrounding passengers exchange glances, the tension thick enough to choke on. Some smirk, clearly entertained. Others look uneasy, unsure whether to side with the man standing his ground or the flight attendant wielding authority. Maria's jaw tightens. Frustration bubbles beneath her composed facade as she steps closer, lowering her voice but keeping it sharp. "We have rules, sir. Either remove the hat or what?" Dave interrupts, his tone unwavering. He tilts his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as if daring her to follow through. Her face flushes red, but she falters, unable to respond. After a tense moment, she huffs loudly, spinning on her heel and storming off toward the galley. Her muttered words in her native language trail behind her like a cloud of bitterness. Dave shrugs, unbothered, and continues down the aisle. He finds his seat by the window, sets his bag in the overhead bin, and settles in. With deliberate care, he adjusts his hat, tilting it back slightly as if to make it even more visible. Then, with the calm composure of a man who's seen far worse storms, he pulls out a book and begins to read. The whispers around him don't stop, nor do the sideways glances. The atmosphere feels charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm cracks the sky open. But Dave sits quietly, his calm defiance radiating like a shield, ready for whatever comes next. Once the plane reaches cruising altitude, the cabin settles into a lull as passengers begin to relax. The seatbelt sign blinks off, but before anyone can truly get comfortable, Maria reappears at the head of the aisle. She's not alone this time. Flanking her are a junior flight attendant, barely out of training, judging by her shaky grip on a clipboard, and the purser, an older man with thinning gray hair and the weary expression of someone who's seen far too many in-flight dramas. Maria strides forward with a purpose, her polished shoes clicking against the floor. Her expression is a carefully crafted mask of exaggerated professionalism, but the simmering annoyance beneath is impossible to miss. Her companions follow hesitantly, clearly uneasy about being dragged into this confrontation. "Sir?" Maria begins, stopping directly in front of Dave's seat. Her voice oozes with exaggerated politeness, the kind that barely hides contempt. "We've received several complaints about your hat." She gestures vaguely toward the other passengers, as if they've all unanimously rallied against him. "If you don't remove it, we'll have to escalate this." Dave, reclining slightly in his window seat, doesn't even look up at first. He takes his time, finishing the sentence in the book he's reading before deliberately closing it. The soft thud of the hardcover snapping shut feels louder than it should in the tense atmosphere. When he finally looks up, his expression is a mix of boredom and mild irritation. He locks eyes with Maria, his piercing blue gaze as steady as ever. "Escalate away," he says, his tone calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Maria's professional mask cracks, her face flushes, and she takes a step closer, leaning down so her words are for Dave and Dave alone. "You think this hat makes you look patriotic?" she hisses, her voice low but sharp enough to draw blood. Her lip curls into a sneer. "It just screams ignorance." Her words cut through the cabin like a blade. Conversations halt mid-sentence. Passengers twist in their seats, openly watching now. A few gasp audibly. Across the aisle, a teenager suppresses a giggle, while a businessman 2 rows ahead fidgets uncomfortably, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. Dave doesn't flinch. Instead, he lets out a quiet sigh, the kind that suggests he's dealing with a minor inconvenience rather than a public spectacle. He tilts his head slightly, meeting Maria's gaze with unshaken calm. "Look, lady," he says, his tone even and deliberate. "I paid for this seat, just like everyone else here. Unless I'm breaking an actual rule, and I don't think I am, I suggest you let me enjoy the flight." Maria's face turns a deeper shade of red, her anger bubbling over. The junior flight attendant behind her shifts nervously, tugging lightly at Maria's sleeve as if to signal her to back down. Maria brushes her off, doubling down instead. "Fine," she snaps, her voice rising for maximum effect. "If you won't comply, I'll have to notify the captain." Her words hang in the air like a challenge. She takes a step back, pulling out a small notepad with exaggerated flair, scribbling furiously as though documenting a serious infraction. "We have a non-compliant passenger in 14A, she declares loudly, her voice pitched toward the cockpit. "He's disrupting the flight, and we may need to remove him upon landing." The cabin collectively holds its breath. Passengers exchange uneasy glances, some leaning forward for a better view. A woman in the row behind Dave whispers something to her seatmate, who nods solemnly. Dave, unfazed, picks up his book and reopens it, flipping to the page he left off with infuriating nonchalance. To him, Maria's outburst is nothing more than background noise. Maria, flustered and clearly grasping for control, spins on her heel and marches back toward the galley. Her stiff posture and muttered words betray her frustration as she disappears from view. The tension in the cabin lingers like a thundercloud. Passengers whisper and murmur, their eyes darting between Dave and the direction Maria had gone. Some are clearly waiting for the situation to explode further, while others settle in, their curiosity barely concealed. Dave, meanwhile, sits quietly, turning the page of his book as though nothing at all has happened. As the plane begins its descent, the cabin buzzes with the familiar rhythm of pre-landing activity. Overhead bins click open and shut as passengers stash away their last-minute items. Flight attendants move briskly through the aisles, their practiced motions signaling the routine nature of their tasks. The intercom crackles, delivering the captain's standard announcements about weather, arrival time, and safety instructions. Dave, however, is an island of calm amid the bustle. Seated by the window, his posture is relaxed but composed, his red MAGA hat still sitting proudly atop his head. While others around him fuss with bags and trays, he pulls out his sleek smartphone, unlocking it with a swift swipe. His fingers move with precision as he scrolls through emails, his sharp blue eyes scanning the screen. Without hesitation, he dials a number, lifting the phone to his ear. His tone, though quiet, cuts through the ambient noise like a blade. "Hey, it's Dave," he begins, pausing briefly to listen. His voice carries an unmistakable edge of authority, calm but resolute. "I need to flag an issue with one of our flights. Yes, Flight 782. I'll explain when I land." Standing a few rows away under the pretense of tidying the galley, Maria perks up, overhearing his words. Her smirk returns, the same self-assured expression she's worn throughout the flight. "What, calling your lawyer?" she sneers, her voice dripping with mockery. "Good luck with that." Dave doesn't even glance at her. He slips his phone back into his pocket, adjusts the brim of his hat with deliberate care, and reaches for a pair of sleek sunglasses from his jacket. Slipping them on, he leans back in his seat, crossing his arms with an air of effortless composure, as if Maria's taunts are beneath his notice. The plane lands smoothly, and as it taxis to the gate, the captain's voice comes over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated while we assist a special passenger." Maria straightens up, her confidence surging. In her mind, this is her moment of triumph, the culmination of her report on Dave. She smooths her uniform, adjusts her hair, and folds her arms, her smirk widening. She watches the front of the cabin, ready to see Dave escorted off the plane in disgrace. The doors open, and instead of security or disgruntled ground staff, two senior airline executives stride on board. Their crisp suits and serious expressions exude authority. Passengers immediately take notice, the atmosphere in the cabin shifting to quiet anticipation. Without hesitation, the executives make their way directly to Dave. The older of the two offers a respectful nod. "Mr. Weston," he says, his voice steady and professional. "We're so sorry for this incident. We'll handle it immediately." Maria's smirk freezes in place. Her face drains of color as the weight of the name Weston sinks in. "Wait, Mr. Weston?" she stammers, her voice barely above a whisper. Dave stands slowly, his tall frame seeming even more imposing as he removes his sunglasses. His piercing blue eyes meet Maria's wide, panicked gaze with calm intensity. "That's right," he says, his voice measured but firm. "I'm Dave Weston, co-founder of this airline." A stunned silence falls over the cabin. Passengers exchange wide-eyed glances, some already reaching for their phones to capture the moment. Maria stumbles, her mouth opening and closing as she searches for words, but nothing comes out. Dave adjusts his hat with deliberate precision, his movements cool and collected. "And I can assure you," he continues, his tone unwavering, "this flight's service, or lack thereof, will be addressed. Thoroughly." The senior executive turns to Maria, his expression icy. "Miss, please gather your belongings. You'll be escorted for a disciplinary review." Maria's hands tremble as she fumbles to unclip her name tag. Her polished composure is gone, replaced by visible panic. She glances around the cabin, but no one meets her eyes. Instead, phones are raised, documenting her fall from grace. Dave picks up his carry-on bag and steps into the aisle, his movements unhurried. As he approaches the exit, he pauses, turning back to address Maria. "For future reference," he says, tipping his hat slightly, "never judge someone by what's on their head. Focus on what's in yours." The cabin erupts in quiet applause, the sound growing as passengers let out their pent-up emotions. Dave strides off the plane unbothered and victorious, leaving Maria behind to face the full consequences of her actions. Maria's confidence collapses like a sandcastle against the tide. Her lips tremble, and the words spill out in a disjointed rush. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." Her voice, once so sharp and commanding, now wavers with panic, barely audible over the deafening silence of the cabin. Dave raises his hand, a calm yet authoritative gesture that stops her mid-sentence. The power in his movement isn't in its force, but in its precision. A clear message. Enough. "Save it," he says, his voice firm, measured. His piercing blue eyes lock onto hers, leaving no room for argument. The disdain in his tone is subtle, almost imperceptible, but it cuts deeper than any shout could. You didn't care who I was when you were disrespecting me. Now you're sorry? Funny how that works. The silence that follows is suffocating. Every passenger has stopped pretending not to watch. Heads turn, eyes widen, and not a single breath is wasted on subtlety. A few passengers pull out their phones, holding them up with barely concealed glee, their lenses fixed on Maria's humiliation. Others sit in stunned silence, their faces a mixture of shock and satisfaction. The senior executive steps forward, his face devoid of sympathy, his voice professional but frosty. "Miss," he says, addressing Maria with a tone that slices through the tension. "Please collect your things. You'll be escorted off this flight for a disciplinary review." Maria's face drains of color, the words hitting her like a freight train. Her hands tremble as she reaches up to unclip her name tag, her movements shaky and uncoordinated. Her eyes dart around the cabin, searching for an ally, anyone who might step in and rescue her. But the passengers avoid her gaze, their silence louder than any condemnation. A younger flight attendant approaches hesitantly, her expression a mixture of pity and discomfort. She gestures toward the exit, her voice barely above a whisper. "This way, please." Maria stumbles forward, her earlier bravado shattered, her head bowed as if the weight of her actions is too much to bear. The walk to the front of the plane feels endless, each step dragging her closer to an inescapable reckoning. The tension in the cabin remains thick, hanging in the air like a storm cloud that hasn't fully passed. But as Maria disappears through the door, a quiet ripple of approval spreads among the passengers. A few nod subtly, others exchange murmurs of satisfaction. Dave, unbothered, stands slowly. He straightens his blazer, adjusts his MAGA hat with deliberate care, and casually retrieves his carry-on from the overhead bin. His every movement exudes the calm authority of a man completely in control. As he approaches the exit, he pauses at the front of the cabin. The eyes of the passengers follow him, their anticipation palpable. Dave turns slightly, his expression composed but faintly amused. He tips his red MAGA hat with a small, confident smirk. "Enjoy your flight, folks," he says, his voice smooth and self-assured, carrying just enough humor to leave an impression. The plane erupts into applause. The sound swells, echoing through the cabin as passengers release the tension they've held for so long. The clapping is more than approval. It's a celebration of the dramatic justice they've just witnessed. Dave strides off the aircraft without looking back, his calm demeanor unwavering. His exit is a final statement, a masterclass in composure and resolve, leaving behind a clear message. Respect is not optional. Maria, meanwhile, is escorted down the jet bridge toward an uncertain future, her career likely in tatters. Justice, sharp and uncompromising, has been served, and with style.